Sylvester Stallone walked onto the bustling set of a primetime television broadcast, and in the very first moment, something absolutely amazing happened. Something so surprising that every viewer watching from home felt the electrifying jolt through their screens. No one in the crowd had anticipated it, and yet it would go on to become one of the most hilarious and greatest ever moments in live television history. Bright lights flooded every corner of Studio 5 as Stallone took his seat, exuding a calm confidence that made the entire room buzz with curiosity. An undercurrent of excitement pulsed through the audience as though they all sensed a momentous event was about to take place. This was no ordinary interview. The famous host, Ethan Caldwell, known for turning heated conversations into viral controversies, was already waiting in his signature tailored suit, gripping his index cards like weapons of war. In the control room, producers braced themselves for potential fireworks, not realizing that they would soon witness the kind of broadcast meltdown that would leave them speechless. There was a magnetic energy in the air. Observers could feel the tension between the iconic actor, celebrated for embodying American toughness, and the host whose career thrived on exposing what he perceived as outdated ideas. Stallone's posture, relaxed yet undeniably formidable, contrasted with Caldwell's carefully rehearsed composure. The audience, many clutching their phones, seemed poised to capture every second, anticipating that something explosive was about to be unleashed. At first, the host attempted to steer the conversation toward what he saw as societal shifts: the need to redefine strength, the question of whether grit and resilience still had value, and why certain old-school mentalities might be antiquated. Yet, from the very beginning, something about Stallone's body language suggested that he had come fully prepared, not for a polite conversation, but for a moment of truth that would ripple far beyond the studio walls. Beneath those gleaming studio spotlights, Ethan Caldwell prided himself on having cornered many influential figures in the past: politicians, activists, industry giants. He was used to guiding guests down a path of provocative questions, ambushing them with pointed commentary that often left them fumbling and exposed. By contrast, Stallone's presence radiated a quiet, unspoken challenge, an unflinching resolve that hinted this interview would not be an easy ambush. Producers had designed every aspect of the show to draw out drama. The furniture was arranged to maximize confrontation, with Stallone's chair slightly lower to the ground, an old TV trick to make guests appear smaller. The cameras were set for extreme close-ups to capture the slightest flicker of discomfort. Yet Stallone's demeanor showed none of the usual nervous energy. He looked more like a heavyweight fighter leaning on the ropes, waiting for a sparring match to begin, fully confident in his ability to withstand whatever might come next. When the host began guiding the conversation toward the concept of traditional masculinity being outdated, there was a momentary hush. The studio audience, a mix of longtime Stallone fans, casual viewers, and die-hard supporters of Caldwell, leaned in. People held their breath, expecting a stock response about how times had changed, or how an action star might cling stubbornly to old notions of toughness. Instead, the crowd sensed a different shift the moment Stallone started responding. He made it clear that his perspective on toughness had very little to do with outdated bravado. In one powerful sweep, he recast toughness as genuine resilience, discipline, and the capacity to protect and support others when it mattered most. Observers saw Caldwell's posture stiffen, perhaps from surprise, perhaps from a sudden realization that his usual tactics might not deliver the humiliating slip-up he had envisioned. A murmur spread among audience members who whispered to one another, excited at the direction this conversation was taking. People had come expecting a spectacle of sorts. Maybe Caldwell would try to embarrass Stallone, or perhaps Stallone would fall into an apologetic stance. Instead, the air crackled with the sense that the host's traps were not springing effectively. Behind the cameras, crew members exchanged intrigued glances. Technicians managing the audio feed noticed how still and attentive the entire set had become. One of the floor managers, quietly taking notes, felt a sense of foreboding. Whenever Caldwell started to push a topic, like the violence glorified in action movies, or the notion that certain cinematic heroes might perpetuate harmful stereotypes, Stallone calmly redirected. He reframed these pointed critiques into broader reflections about the human spirit, about how adversity is an inescapable part of real life, and how genuine strength is not about bullying but about the willingness to stand up when needed. Most surprisingly, Stallone addressed the audience indirectly, emphasizing that fictional stories serve as parables of resilience more than endorsements of mindless aggression. As he recounted the essence of his iconic roles, like the boxer who finds victory in hard work and heart, or the troubled veteran who only fought back when left with no other choice, there was a noticeable wave of realization in the audience. People began to see that toughness in Stallone's world was about courage in the face of hardship, not a reckless thirst for conflict. All the while, Ethan Caldwell attempted to maneuver the conversation back to his usual territory. He wanted to cast the actor's stance as archaic or disconnected from modern societal progress. Yet each pivot he tried was met with an even stronger sense of clarity from Stallone. What was intended to corner him into defending toxic aggression instead spotlighted a nuance that Caldwell struggled to refute. That genuine toughness is a virtue that helps real people: the firefighter who faces flames, the single mother working two jobs, the soldier protecting his country, or anyone else who confronts hardship without backing down. The tipping point arrived when Caldwell pushed particularly hard on the notion that violent characters foster a culture of aggression. He invoked contemporary debates about how society should be more inclusive, more open to new definitions of strength, hoping to portray Stallone's perspective as incompatible with a changing world. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every nuance on the host's face. But rather than stumbling, Sylvester Stallone seemed completely at ease. He gently acknowledged that Hollywood indeed often dramatizes violence, but he underscored an undeniable reality. No one solves real-world catastrophes with endless discussions alone. There are moments when firm resolve and direct action, guided by moral principles, become not just optional but necessary for survival. The entire studio fell into a hush that was almost cinematic. No one spoke, no one moved. Even Caldwell's crew, usually quick to react or feed him lines through the earpiece, was caught in that moment of astonishment. It was then that Stallone punctuated his reasoning with an unmistakable conviction. If the world ever truly descended into chaos, the very people who belittle traditional toughness would be the first to appreciate the grit and determination of those who refuse to crumble under pressure. The reaction was instantaneous. The studio audience erupted, some clapping, some gasping in surprise, and others simply stunned into silent awe. It was in that uproar that the comedic, almost hilarious element emerged. Watching Caldwell attempt to maintain composure as he was completely outmaneuvered by Stallone's matter-of-fact logic and measured tone bordered on the surreal. The host, known for being the ultimate puppet master, was now the one struggling to keep control of a conversation that had spiraled beyond his usual theatrics. Once the applause died down, there was a lingering tension that felt both serious and strangely exhilarating. Crew members in the control room could hardly process what had happened. For years, they'd witnessed Caldwell navigate high-pressure interviews with ease, steering them like a well-rehearsed stage play. But this time was different. Stallone didn't lash out, didn't lose his cool. Instead, he redirected every attempt to corner him into an honest, grounded reflection on what genuine resilience means in everyday life. Some individuals in the live audience who had never considered themselves fans of action movies found themselves nodding in agreement with Stallone's viewpoints. Others who'd come specifically to cheer on Caldwell were now noticeably quiet, uncertain how to react to the host's visible discomfort. And amidst this swirl of silent, shifting allegiances, the broadcast cameras continued rolling, capturing every raised eyebrow and every half-hearted laugh Caldwell tried to muster as he soldiered on. Producers on the sidelines exchanged frantic whispers about what to do next. The show's format dictated that Caldwell would have the upper hand with a series of quick-fire questions, but it was clear that continuing along the same line of attack wasn't working. In fact, it might be costing them the audience's sympathy. Yet there was no turning back. The interview was live, unstoppable, and unfolding in real time. In that singular moment, nobody quite realized that these sequences, Stallone's cool responses, Caldwell's flustered expressions, and the audience's passionate reaction, would soon explode across social media in a frenzy of viral clips. All people in the studio understood was that a line had been crossed. The host's carefully sculpted narrative had been derailed, and Stallone was emerging as something of a folk hero for anyone who felt that modern discourse had vilified timeless virtues like perseverance and resolve. Those who watched from home began furiously typing their reactions online. Snippets of the broadcast were screen recorded and posted on various platforms within seconds. Viewers recognized a rare type of authenticity in Stallone's stance. He seemed disinterested in playing the media game. His focus was on delivering plain truth, that real strength is not mere showmanship, but a fundamental requirement for those who protect, nurture, and build up society. Meanwhile, Ethan Caldwell pressed forward, determined to salvage the situation, or at least corral the conversation back into safe territory. But the more he tried to highlight how society had moved on from macho ideals, the more Stallone's perspective shone a light on a critical gap in modern thought. The notion that acknowledging strength somehow negates compassion or empathy. Stallone wove these points together seamlessly, illustrating that discipline, resilience, and moral fortitude can coexist with kindness and emotional openness. Watching this unfold, many in the room experienced an internal shift. Even those predisposed to side with the host were struck by the clarity of Stallone's message. The moment the actor began reflecting on everyday heroes, first responders, military personnel, and hard-working parents, it became nearly impossible for the audience to deny the real-world necessity of unwavering toughness. As the interview's first half concluded, cameras cut away to a commercial break. In that fleeting pause, the atmosphere behind the scenes was electric with hushed conversations. A few individuals scrolled through their phones, mouths agape at the sheer volume of social media posts already flooding in. Others tried to gather themselves for what would happen next, because the segment wasn't over and there was no telling how Caldwell might regain control. Stallone calmly removed his earpiece to stretch his shoulders, almost as if he had just finished a light warm-up in a boxing gym. Meanwhile, Caldwell's usual self-assured swagger seemed to flicker under the weight of a public moment that was undeniably slipping through his fingers. Staffers hovered around the host, offering water, adjusting his microphone, and frantically whispering last-ditch strategies. Yet, underneath all that frantic maneuvering, a revelation was settling in for many who had witnessed this exchange. The debate was no longer just about how men should express toughness or how times have changed. It was, at its core, about the gap between real-life resilience, demonstrated by people who shoulder heavy burdens daily, and the theoretical frameworks some media personalities love to champion. And so while the studio staff prepared for the next round of questions, a more profound conversation had already taken root in the minds of viewers and audience members alike. It was a conversation about courage, resilience, and the role that genuine strength plays in a society that sometimes forgets who upholds its foundations. When the red camera light blinked back on, the atmosphere in Studio 5 felt decidedly different. The tension from the earlier exchange still clung to every surface like a static charge, impossible to ignore. Ethan Caldwell's face appeared on the large studio monitor, carefully schooled into a semblance of calm, yet a flicker of anxiety lingered in his eyes. Across from him, Sylvester Stallone maintained that same steady composure, an aura of ease that seemed almost supernatural in light of the show's dramatic first half. Producers were counting down silently from behind the cameras. Floor directors waved discreetly, signaling both men to get ready. The part of the interview that followed was meant to be more lighthearted. Some pre-scripted questions about Hollywood anecdotes, comedic stories from Stallone's early career, or maybe a snippet about upcoming projects. Yet everyone in the room could tell that the original plan had been irreparably derailed. Viewers tuning in from home hadn't been expecting to see Caldwell at a loss, nor had they anticipated witnessing Stallone deliver such a forthright defense of real-world resilience. Nevertheless, the show had to continue. The moment the host spoke again, it became clear he was trying to recast the conversation into something more benign, perhaps hoping to regain footing or at least reduce the friction. But the dynamic had already shifted, and the broadcast would never return to the polite banter usually seen in glossy, late-night interviews. Unbeknownst to those inside the studio, the internet had exploded during the commercial break. Short clips taken from phones in the live audience had begun circulating on social media, capturing what fans were calling Stallone's hilarious verbal knockout. The hashtag #Stallone Showdown was trending across multiple platforms, swiftly climbing the ranks to overtake typical celebrity gossip and political discussions. In living rooms across the nation, families and friends huddled around screens, rewatching the viral snippets. Stallone's biting remarks on genuine strength, the necessity of resilience, and the importance of discipline had resonated in a way that stunned even those who were neutral about the actor's career. Hundreds of thousands of comments flooded in, everything from unbridled praise for Stallone's candor to fiery critiques accusing him of clinging to a bygone era. The online debate skewed heavily toward admiration. People who felt silenced by what they perceived as a relentless culture of political correctness suddenly found a spokesperson in Stallone's no-nonsense approach. Others argued that Caldwell's attempts to corner Stallone had backfired, simply because the actor refused to crumble under rhetorical pressure. It wasn't so much that Stallone delivered a fancy speech. It was that his authenticity contrasted sharply with the host's carefully scripted lines. Meanwhile, on set, the second half of the interview trudged along. Stallone answered each of Caldwell's remaining prompts with an almost effortless air, weaving in references to his past experiences in show business, but never fully letting go of the core idea he had established. Toughness, when guided by moral grounding, is nothing to be ashamed of. He spoke passionately, yet calmly, about the everyday heroes of society, workers who toil in grueling conditions, parents who make endless sacrifices, and those who stand guard in dangerous professions. A sense of quiet awe rippled through the audience. The usual bright lights entertainment factor had transformed into something more meaningful. Ordinarily, Caldwell's show thrived on sensationalism. He would orchestrate arguments to generate heated debates. But this time, the host's usual approach had created a moment so potent that he himself appeared dwarfed by it, overshadowed by the magnitude of Stallone's message. In a last-ditch attempt to strike a balance, Caldwell asked a few generic questions about Stallone's upcoming projects, hoping to pivot to safer ground. Stallone, ever the professional, discussed them briefly but made no attempt to lighten the seriousness of what had transpired moments earlier. His replies remained grounded, underscoring that while escapism is part of Hollywood's function, real-world challenges often demand real-world strength. As the segment neared its close, there was no triumphant summation from the host. No neat bow wrapping up the conversation. Instead, it ended with a somewhat muted farewell, Caldwell thanking the actor for appearing on the show, his voice lacking its usual punch of confidence. It was as though everyone sensed that the real moment had already occurred, and that trying to recapture it was impossible. The show's official broadcast cut to its final commercial block, and the credits rolled soon after. In that time, a kind of hushed pandemonium broke out behind the curtains. Network executives paced the hallways, phones glued to their ears. Social media managers frantically typed replies to a tsunami of posts, trying in vain to control the unfolding narrative. Where they once anticipated a slick, self-serving segment for the network's brand, they were now forced to address public perceptions that Caldwell had been outclassed on his own stage. Producers checked the early analytics rolling in from the network's online stream. The numbers were skyrocketing, far surpassing any typical ratings Caldwell usually generated. But it wasn't purely celebratory, it was the type of viral wave that could turn dangerous, if not properly managed. Some argued for cutting out the most controversial portions before uploading the interview to the network's official pages. Others insisted on leaving everything intact to avoid accusations of censorship. Meanwhile, Ethan Caldwell himself retreated to his dressing room, accompanied by a tight circle of advisors and PR personnel. He was overheard insisting that they could still spin this and shape the narrative to appear as though he had orchestrated a wide-ranging, provocative discussion. Yet the more they scrolled through the public's reactions, the clearer it became that people saw the interview as a spontaneous, unfiltered moment of truth, one that Caldwell had tried to steer but ultimately lost. Throughout the social media maelstrom, Sylvester Stallone remained characteristically silent. He posted no follow-up statements, gave no clarifying interviews to set the record straight, and made no immediate attempts to celebrate his perceived victory. In fact, he simply went about his usual business, attending to other commitments, filming responsibilities, and personal routines. While commentators across various networks dissected each second of the interview, Stallone appeared unmoved by the frenzy, as if the entire ordeal was just another day in a career marked by iconic, unpredictable moments. This silence only magnified the sense of authenticity people attached to Stallone's words. In an age where public figures often rush to social media to amplify their voices, Stallone's decision to remain largely aloof made the impact of his earlier statements resonate more deeply. It reminded onlookers that sometimes one of the greatest displays of strength is not continuing the fight, but calmly walking away once the truth has been spoken. Across mainstream outlets, coverage of the interview splintered into two camps. On one side, multiple talk shows and opinion pieces championed Stallone's stance as a wake-up call for a society that frequently undervalues resilience. Their hosts echoed the sentiment that not everything that's old school is inherently toxic, often replaying the clip of Stallone referencing the single mom, the firefighter, and the soldier as prime examples of real-world grit. On the other side, critics framed Stallone as a stubborn symbol of the past, lamenting that the virality of his interview only proved how deeply ingrained certain stereotypes still were. They questioned his refusal to adapt to a modern cultural shift, arguing that his emphasis on grit and tenacity overlooked the importance of empathy and emotional well-being. Some labeled his words reactionary, claiming they stoked divisiveness in an era that should be embracing change. Meanwhile, Caldwell's network found itself in the eye of the storm. The official statement they released attempted to walk a delicate line, praising the value of open dialogue while also insisting that the show aimed to reflect the evolving views of modern society. But these polished phrases did little to quell the uproar. Anonymous insiders leaked stories about tense boardroom discussions, revealing that advertisers were split on whether to continue backing a platform increasingly associated with sensational gotcha tactics. While media pundits hashed out the ideological implications, ordinary viewers were having an entirely different conversation. YouTube channels unaffiliated with mainstream outlets posted hour-long breakdowns of the event, dissecting the body language and subtext behind every moment. Some self-proclaimed experts highlighted how Stallone's calm control of his posture signaled unshakable confidence, contrasting it with Caldwell's visible discomfort. Others praised Stallone's references to everyday heroes, arguing that the so-called woke media often ignores the backbone of society, the laborers, protectors, and caregivers who rely on mental and emotional fortitude daily. In small-town diners, employees and customers alike talked about the interview over breakfast, agreeing that the world could indeed use a dose of honest determination. In office break rooms, workers swapped clips on their phones, pointing out the moment Stallone suggested that real strength is not about aggression, but about refusing to bend under life's harsh realities. Even in college lecture halls, students debated the merits of Stallone's perspective, assessing whether his version of toughness could coexist with progressive values like empathy, inclusivity, and mental health awareness. Far beyond celebrity gossip, the discussion transcended typical TV chatter, morphing into a broader societal reflection. Articles appeared, penned by veterans who resonated with Stallone's words on discipline. Single parents wrote heartfelt blog posts describing how resilience had been the key to raising children against the odds. Therapists chimed in, outlining how healthy expressions of emotional toughness could complement vulnerability rather than contradict it. While these far-reaching dialogues continued, Ethan Caldwell encountered an unexpected fallout. His show, previously buoyed by a loyal viewership that enjoyed his confrontational style, began hemorrhaging credibility. A portion of his regular audience sensed that Caldwell had shown a lack of genuine curiosity in the interview, unwilling to engage with Stallone's perspective beyond the preset script. This revelation undermined the trust they once placed in him as a supposedly sincere commentator. In the weeks following the fiasco, internal memos indicated a worrying dip in the show's ratings. Executive producers scrambled to rebrand the host's approach, urging him to present more balanced viewpoints and tone down the prearranged takedowns. Caldwell responded by appearing in various media outlets, offering his spin on the event. He insisted that the interview was taken out of context by social media sensationalists, claiming viewers missed the bigger picture of what he was trying to achieve. But those statements fell flat in the face of countless unedited clips that viewers themselves had circulated. Some fans of Caldwell argued that Stallone had overshadowed the host's valid points about evolving societal norms. But that minority voice drowned in the sea of applause for Stallone's straightforward take. The trend continued. Day by day, Caldwell's influence waned, forcing his network to shift him to smaller segments with safer content. He wasn't fired or publicly reprimanded, but the writing on the wall was unmistakable. His star power had significantly dimmed. In the midst of the swirling headlines and debates, Sylvester Stallone appeared on a small local broadcast in Texas, promoting an upcoming charity event for underprivileged youth. The interviewer, a far cry from Caldwell's style, softly broached the viral interview, asking if Stallone was surprised by how big it had become. With characteristic humility, he shrugged off the question, implying that he simply spoke his mind and had no intention of sparking such a massive reaction. That single offhanded response from Stallone sparked another wave of social media buzz. It underscored that his stance wasn't part of a calculated publicity stunt, but rather a genuine reflection of his personal values. Viewers, already enamored by the candidness he had displayed, found themselves further persuaded that his words during the heated interview were not tailored for notoriety. They stemmed from real convictions about grit and personal responsibility. In the ensuing months, the Stallone interview story continued to resurface whenever conversations turned to the balance between old-school resilience and modern empathy. High-profile podcasts and video commentators use the episode as a case study in media manipulation, dissecting Caldwell's approach versus Stallone's authenticity. Even mental health professionals weighed in, discussing how true fortitude requires not only strength but also self-awareness and compassion, an angle many suggested that Stallone indirectly supported when he separated genuine toughness from mere aggression. Amidst all this, countless viewers confessed that, for the first time, they felt validated in valuing determination and grit, qualities that some corners of popular culture had begun to dismiss. Sports teams played Stallone's interview clips as motivational material, framing his words alongside real-life examples of underdogs who overcame adversity. Community leaders invoked his statements in volunteer events to highlight the power of perseverance when serving the less fortunate. Eventually, the scorching flame of immediate internet chatter cooled into a steady glow of appreciation for Sylvester Stallone's refusal to yield to a scripted narrative. People continued to watch the viral clips, not only for entertainment, but to remind themselves that unwavering resolve can be a force for good in a world that often shames it. Major media outlets, even those critical of Stallone's viewpoints, grudgingly admitted that this clash represented a moment of unvarnished honesty in an arena dominated by calculated spin. Some cultural analysts noted that the collective fascination with this interview hinted at a broader cultural hunger for raw, unfiltered truths that transcend political labels. Meanwhile, Caldwell's show struggled to regain its previous buzz. Despite attempts at rebranding and featuring new guests with a softer style, the shadow of that interview loomed large, a reminder of the day his tactics had backfired spectacularly. In the end, the aftermath of Stallone's on-air clash was more than just a passing viral sensation. It grew into a phenomenon that opened a window into society's relationship with toughness, moral resolve, and authentic expression. The public's response, stretching far beyond typical Hollywood gossip, reaffirmed that an honest perspective, even one that isn't polished to fit the zeitgeist, can cut through layers of posturing to strike a fundamental chord in people's hearts. For Stallone himself, life rolled on. He continued doing what he had always done, working hard, taking on new projects, and quietly supporting charitable causes. He gave no extended victory lap, no elaborate follow-up interviews. His silence became part of the legend of that fateful broadcast. A seasoned actor who walked into a high-pressure TV show, countered a media-savvy host's tactics with straightforward conviction, and then walked out as unaffected as he'd entered. It was a reminder to millions of viewers that behind each of us lies a well of inner strength waiting to be tapped, a kind of resilience that doesn't need to bow to the fleeting winds of current trends. And for those who look up to Stallone as a cultural icon, the interview served as a timeless testament that sometimes the greatest show of power is holding your ground calmly under bright lights, fully prepared to face the punches and emerging as the embodiment of real, unshakable fortitude. Because in a time when everything can be spun or filtered, the loudest statement of all might just be the quiet certainty of believing in what is right, even when the world tries its hardest to make you doubt it.
If you enjoyed this story, there's another video on screen right now. Go ahead and give it a look for an even more astonishing stories. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. That way you'll never miss our newest uploads.